Thank you very much. Good morning. Uh, we had an excellent inaugural session, and after that, this is the first technical session on the New World Order, Global Challenges and BIMSTEC. I'm really delighted to have an excellent panel with me, and let me introduce them to you. We have the panelist, Professor Mustafizur Rahman, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, Dhaka, Bangladesh. We also have Dr. Ganeshana Wignaraja, Advisor to the President of Sri Lanka on Strategic Trade Policy, and he is joining online from Colombo. He was supposed to be here, and we are missing you, Dr. Ganeshan, because probably some commitments really did not allow you to come here, but glad that you could make it online. Thank you. We also have Dr. Sabyasachi Kaur, RBI Chair Professor, Institute of Economic Growth, New Delhi, India, who is here today. And also we have Dr. Nihal Pitigala, former senior economist, the World Bank, USA. He is also joining online. Thank you, Dr. Nihal Pitigala. In addition, we also have, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Rupa Chanda, Director, Trade, Investment and Innovation Division, UNESCA, Bangkok, to deliver the special remarks. So this session, I'll just say a few words to set the tone, and then I'm quite sure that the capable panelists, very distinguished panelists, will speak, and then they highlight some of the very important issues related to the New World Order and some of the very global challenges and the context where the BIMSTEC countries are in now and what should be the strategies and way forward. So we all know that, and we are expecting the 6th BIMSTEC summit is likely to take place September this year in Bangkok. The changing global order and emerging global challenges require BIMSTEC to take a fresh approach to regional cooperation amid these new dimensions. So when you look at the concept of this new world order, there is a kind of agreement that it refers to an evolving geopolitical landscape characterized by shifting power dynamics, technological advancement, and interconnectedness. So in this context, global challenges have become increasingly complex and interlinked. So ensuring peace and stability in an ever more multipolar world remains a critical imperative. Conflicts, terrorism, and cyber threats transcend national borders, necessitating collaborations efforts among nations. Moreover, rapid advancement in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and digital infrastructure offer immense opportunities, but also raise ethical, security, and regulatory challenges. So the urgent need to address climate change, protect diversity, and promote sustainable development requires global cooperation. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and resource scarcity impact all nations, and including those within the BIMSTEC region. We know that some of the very most vulnerable countries in the world, especially vulnerable to climate change, they are in this region. So furthermore, we also saw how COVID-19 impacted the economies all over the world, and in particular the countries in this region, and that also highlights the importance of regional cooperation in various fronts. But we also know that despite progress, poverty persists in many countries of this region. Bridging economic disparities and achieving inclusive growth are essential not only for global stability, but also for regional well-being. Additionally, several BIMSTEC nations grapple with macroeconomic instability, something what we have been witnessing over the last 2 years or so, and which undermines the efforts to reduce poverty and enhance resilience. So that is something we really need to consider. So against all these issues, and I'm quite sure the distinguished panelists will also raise some of the very important issues, that this session will look at these issues carefully, and we'd like to hear from the panelists on what kind of strategies the BIMSTEC should take and what are the kind of way forward. We know that there are huge opportunities for BIMSTEC cooperation, and some of this, but we are also seeing that this new world order posing some new challenges. So what these countries should do. So with this, may I now invite first Professor Mustafizur Rahman to deliver his speech. So the panelists will get around 8 minutes at the beginning, and then we'll come back in the open question answer session, come back to them for their second round of response. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Since I am speaking first, let me first of all register my deep appreciation to the organizers, SANEM, Chulalongkorn University and its partners, and particularly the Asia Foundation, for this opportunity to share some of my views on a very important topic, and also at a very opportune time, because as Salim has mentioned, the 6th summit of BIMSTEC heads of governments will be taking place in September, and this is a very good time to come up with some concrete recommendations in view of the summit. Salim has rightly mentioned that we are living at a time when there are signs of global commons in terms of environment, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of fourth industrial revolution, and how we can address those, the global commons. But at the same time, I would also like to mention that there are also fragmentation. And we see that in view of the COVID, we have seen how countries have reacted. The importance of nearshoring has become very important. The supply side disruptions and the implications for food security in view of COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war. So I would like to make the point that the need for regional integration within the BIMSTEC has never been so important as of now. And in view of that, how can we deepen our regional, our BIMSTEC-wide cooperation and integration in view of the global challenges that we see in various areas? And in that context, I would like to recall what my good friend Prabir mentions about 6 connectivities that we have to advance. The transport connectivity, the investment connectivity, trade connectivity, logistics connectivity, energy connectivity, and people-to-people connectivity. I think these 6 connectivities are becoming so important in view of deepening BIMSTEC-wide cooperation. And in the context of that, I see that there are signs of encouragement, but also signs of discouragement. We started the BIMSTEC FTA framework in 2004, and our ambition was that it will be not only in goods, but also in services. But after 20 years, we have concluded the FTA in goods. So I think that it's just not the cooperation in goods, but also in services that we'll be needing as we go forward, because services are embedded in trade in goods. So if we don't have currency cooperation, if you don't have digital connectivity, if we don't have trade connectivity, trade facilitation connectivity, logistics connectivity, we will not be able to really reap the benefits of the FTA that we are talking about. So how can we have currency cooperation, if not a common currency? How can we have currency clearance like the Asian currency, Asian ACU Union? How can we have trade facilitation in terms of single window, like the ASEAN single window, interoperability of the systems, digital connectivity? So I think these are the next big challenges if we want to really make the FTA work for the benefit of our countries. I also think that some of the global institutions which are emerging in our region, like the New Development Bank, NDB, the AIIB, BIMSTEC will also have to cooperate. Some of the members of BIMSTEC are also members of the NDB. So currency cooperation in the context of, for example, BIMSTEC, NDB cooperation, BIMSTEC, AIIB cooperation will also become very important as we go forward. Another area where I think we should think about, and BIMSTEC has already talked about it, is the BIMSTEC grid. I think this is also very important. we have to search for avenues where we can reduce our costs. Already, for example, my country, Bangladesh, we have energy cooperation with India. We are thinking about energy cooperation among Bangladesh, India, Bhutan, and Nepal. So I think that there are also opportunities of sub-regional cooperation within BIMSTEC countries, which can then help us to get into BIMSTEC with position of strength. So this is also something that we should think about. The other way, and I will focus on how to make the FTA more effective, is the mutual recognition of agreements and certification. I think this will also be very important if we want to make the FTA effective. And there, I think exchange of specialists, technology transfer, and we can also think about like a technology, BIMSTEC technology bank. The idea has been floated like we have for the LDC technology bank, which is situated in Turkey. So this is also something which is very important because exchange of the best knowledge and best practices is so important. For example, Thailand is a leading producer of poultry and a global exporter as well. But you will need to have the traceability with regard to where it is coming from, etc., etc. And there, SPS, TBT, so this type of standards are becoming very important. So if we can have cross-country learning, I think that will be very important. And there are, as was mentioned also in the first session, that each of our countries have comparative advantages. How do you translate that comparative advantage into competitive advantage? That is where productivity enhancement, exchange of knowledge comes forward. So I think that it is just not the physical movement of goods, but also services, knowledge, technology know-how, which will become very important if we want to make the FTA, which will come into being, successful. So this is something that I think is becoming very important. It was also mentioned that we have set up an eminent persons group in BIMSTEC, and that eminent persons group is to come up with a roadmap. I remember that SARC had an eminent persons group in 1998. And the ambition was that SARC will have an FTA, free trade agreement, then a customs union where you have common tariffs, then you have common market where you have movement of factors of production across the region, and then you have economic union where you coordinate even your economic plans in 20 years. And now, if you look at SARC, for example, even the FTA is not working after 26 years of the group of eminent persons. So, what I'm telling that, yes, the BIMSTEC eminent group of persons is very important, but if we don't have the political will to make the suggestions into realities, then we will have the same experience. So I would like to end at this stage by emphasizing the political will. And how do we trigger the political will? I think these are the type of the events, the intellectual contribution, the evidence, the logic of regional cooperation, the importance of regional cooperation. I would like to distinguish between regionalization and regionalism. Regionalization takes place because our countries are opening. But regionalism is a conscious process that shows that all of us, we can have win-win-win outcomes. And that is the task of events like this. That is the task of think tanks. And I think that from that perspective, these type of events are so important. And the recommendations that will come up with for the summit, in view of the summit, will be so important in triggering and sparking the interest of political leaders so that we have a BIMSTEC-wide regionalization and integration, and we can take advantage of the civilizational and geographical contiguity that we have in the BIMSTEC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mustazir Rahman. I think very nicely you highlighted some of the very important points related to, you brought the issues of the FTA in a kind of, in the newer context, when these countries, they are facing a lot of challenges. At the same time, you highlighted that that the FTA should not only be in trade in goods, but it needs to include some of the various other aspects. You talked about the currency cooperation, and some of the things are happening at the bilateral level, at a smaller scale, but I think there is a need to explore how these things can be done at a more regional level, more effectively. But I think the last point, what you mentioned, this is something probably the most important or the center point of all these challenges, kind of whether there is a deficit in the commitment or the political will to carry this BIMSTEC agenda forward. And this is something where I fully agree with you that these kind of forums and the discussions will really generate the, the demand for this political will. Let me now invite Dr. Ganeshan Vignaraja for his intervention. Over to you, Dr. Ganeshan.
Thank you very much to the organizers, Stanim, Chula, and Asia Foundation. I just want to qualify that today I'm speaking as an academic from the Overseas Development Institute in London and also Gateway House in Mumbai, not as an advisor to the Sri Lankan government. So just my remarks should be seen in that way as not being official. I want to build on what Mustafir has done very cleverly and usefully by just talking a little bit about the global outlook, a little bit about the progress of BIMSTEC, and then sort of mention 5 areas that I think we should be thinking about as the summit and senior officials meetings and others take place. So on the global economy, I think the big story is that we have gone from this era of hyper-globalization, which was probably the 90s onwards till the global financial crisis, and then to an era of probably globalization, right? So there's still integration happening today, but it's at a much slower pace than before. And globally, we are seeing really growth of around 3%, right? Now, that is much lower than what we had seen previous to COVID. And the key risks really looming are the possibility of a Trump presidency with an inward-oriented protectionist United States that may emerge. China's faster than expected slowdown with the property crisis, as well as issues of domestic debt and lack of consumer confidence coming in there. So the second engine of the world is in a slower state. And then this emerging market debt crisis, which is not over yet. And my country, Sri Lanka, is engulfed in this in a terrible way, and we see it. Now, BIMSTEC economies, meaning South Asia and Southeast Asia, offer really a very good motor counter to this, and growth is much better in this region. We have, India growing at 6%, Thailand growing at 3% plus, Sri Lanka trying to position itself in BIMSTEC, and so on. And so, that's quite useful as a backdrop to more regional cooperation amidst a kind of a closing, more uncertain world economy. I think that was my first point. Now, BIMSTEC itself, in 1997, it got established. It's relatively young, but rather large. And the fifth summit obviously had some concrete achievements, and I think will be taken as a landmark. The charter, the master plan, and other issues, I think, are very important. But probably one feels it's a glass half full, and more has to be done to make it a truly transformative organization, even as a regional organization that is based on technical cooperation rather than necessarily a political organization the way that SAARC was conceived, right? So it's half full. Now, there are 5 areas in my last set of points that we need to think about to keep much more effective. The first is this master plan. I mean, it's very ambitious and it's multimodal. But a key implementation issue is whether there is additionality of financing to make it work. I mean, it's master plan, anyone can write a master plan, right, with big numbers, but who is going to provide the money and how will it be raised? Is it going to be MDB-led? And, if you think about it, and I've done some back-of-the-envelope calculations, the BIMSTEC infrastructure investment gap if we really want this to work, is probably north of $200 billion. That is 2.5, 3 times the size of an economy like Sri Lanka. Otherwise this won't get done properly. The regional bits will get neglected. The national bits might get done. And so we need really mobilizing private financing. I think that's the really key thought if we're going to get this working. We're going to have infrastructure bonds. We're going to have public-private partnerships. And we're going to have MDBs, World Bank, AIIB, ADB, working in a much more integrated way than they ever have worked before. The second point is one that I think was mentioned, which is the digital economy and AI. This has been underplayed in the master plan. So it means really this 5G technology infrastructure. It means digital skills and awareness, which are woefully lacking in our region. And it means business-friendly approach to regulation and e-commerce. All areas that I think we just haven't thought about properly in the BIMSTEC context. And I really hope, some thinking is done in this conference and elsewhere. On the FTA, Mustafir rightly pointed out that it has been very disappointing. My main point about this is it's really not geared to a supply chain world of the 21st century trade. It doesn't take into account sufficiently the new issues of trade, beyond Singapore issues. There's a whole bunch of them we need to think about, particularly around technology and about modern types of integration and also ecotech sufficiently. So my radical proposal is that, we should set a deadline of 1 year to conclude it. And if it's not done in this 1 year, we should just junk it and start again and make it fit for purpose and really build it for a supply chain world. Otherwise, we will not see the kind of gains we would like from FTAs to occur at a regional level. And it's particularly critical given the political economy of the world that's playing out. The last point I want to sort of make really is about the Secretariat. Now, the BIMSTEC Secretariat is nascent. It's nice to have headquarters in Dhaka, but for it to be a proper coordinator really needs a massive skill upscaling with resourcing. And I think the ASEAN model is worthwhile re-looking at. And India's announcement during the 5th summit of $1 million, I think was very nice, but that's kind of small. We need about $50 million, I think, to make a secretariat like this work. And I don't see that money coming anytime soon. And we also need a lot more technically oriented staff in there to make this process work much more from the political side, which is one bit of an institution like this, but also the technical assistance arm. And I think the BIMSTEC fund idea is very important with a proper support of the 3 MDBs we mentioned. And I think the World Bank has to play a major role. So in conclusion, we're in a much more uncertain world. The major engines of the world economy may be faltering in different ways. But BIMSTEC has some progress on the economic front, and then the regional organization is evolving in kind of a stepwise manner. But there is a large in tray really for Thailand, India, and other BIMSTEC members to take forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Ganeshan. So the very important points, starting from financing to scaling up BIMSTEC Secretariat's capacity, and then you talked about FTA. And very interestingly, you said, kind of to set a deadline. I think this is definitely a very good proposal. And also, you talked about how to include this digital economy, AI, into this master plan. Thank you. Let me invite Dr. Sabyasachi Kaur next, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Raihan, and thank you for the excellent, the local organizers for hosting this conference. I'm going to take a slightly more political approach to the whole issue because earlier panelists have already covered a number of issues that I was going to talk about. And it was made salient that politics is becoming more and more important. I will also touch upon what is the new world order and what are the new challenges, so that we have a much more clear idea about what we need to do about any such regional gathering as the BIMSTEC. I'm also going to go out and suggest some quite radical suggestions, which are not part of the current thinking, but I take the challenge thrown by Professor Raihan that we need to rethink. So in that context, my points will be salient. So let's take a step back and think of what is the new world order that we have now. And to do that, I'll start by recounting the old world order, so to speak, or let me call it the post-Cold War world order. And there are three aspects to this which have changed in the new world order. There's the political aspect, there's the economic aspect, and there's also the aspect of governance structure. And I'll come to them one by one. So in the politics, the post-Cold War order was basically US-led and largely unipolar. This led to basically a very, in terms of the economy, global economy, it led to a relatively stable period. Many of you may remember that this was the period which was called the Great Moderation, not many shocks to the global economy. And the engine of growth was the West mostly, with the US and the European economies providing the most of the thrust in terms of growth. The third world, including South Asia and Southeast Asia, was focused on growth because, as everybody understood, we need to first attain certain levels of prosperity. And that was basically the picture in terms of the global economy. In terms of governance structures, we had a very clear-cut multilateral governance structure. At the global level, we had organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, which provided the rules of the game. Countries like the South Asian countries and the South Asian countries knew the rules of the game, and they could interact with other countries in terms of trade, etc., by those rules. But other than these global governance structures, there were also regional cooperation. So BIMSTEC was set up during that period in a time when the old world order was still basically the way we thought of the world. And again, as somebody has mentioned, something changed with the global financial crisis and afterwards. And we have what we are now calling the New World Order. What we have in terms of the changes. In politics, we've seen first a move from a unipolar world to a bipolar world. We have seen that this has come as a result of, partly as a result of US reluctance to be the leader anymore. Now we get, kind of mixed signals from the US whether they want to be the leader of the world. But as a result of this, bipolar world, we now have another axis based mostly in terms of China plus Russia. And this is the world that we live in. And here, the attempt that India has been trying to put in place for some time is to move towards a more multipolar world, which is, as I shall clarify later on, not to go with either of the current axes. And there are good reasons for developing countries not to do so. So in terms of the economic order, the change is that mostly it's a decline in the Western economies and a rise in Asia. So India is a major part of this rise, but of course we have a history starting from Japan, the miracle economies, and of course China is the big story here. The other part of the economic factor, the global economy, which is relevant now, and other people have talked about it, is what we are now calling the polycrisis, which is that within a period of about 15 to 20 years, we have had huge shocks, which usually are enough to derail the global economy. And we are having them within a very short period and almost simultaneously. Added to that is also the long-term adverse economic impact of the climate change. So this is the reality of the economics of global economy as we face it. In terms of institutions also, there has been a breakdown in the multilateral world order that we looked at. And we have moved to a more multipolar world where rather than rules, discussions are the order of the day. And instead of WTO or the IMF taking the lead, it is now the G7s or the G20s that decide what way the world is going to move. It's much more discretionary than before. So what are the global challenges that have come up with this change in the world order? The nature of the change in the world order, global world order, is political economic, so it's not purely economic anymore. So the changes are also in terms of politics and economics. The first challenge that I would like to highlight is that global growth is getting squeezed out because of the bipolar world. Basically the friction between the two large groups that we have. On the one hand, the demand comes from the West. On the other, the supply comes from China mainly. And because there is this friction between them, global growth is not expected to be as good as... Yeah. So the global growth is not expected to be as high as it was in the past. That's one challenge. The other challenges are basically that with the multilateral organizations getting weak, what has happened is that countries which are facing shocks are no longer getting the help that they need. We have the example of Sri Lanka, and to an extent Bangladesh also went through a slightly difficult period. And one would expect that in a strong multilateral world, these countries would get the support that they need. But that is not what we are seeing, and we live in a world where shocks can actually reduce some of these countries to real pain for the people. So given that these are some of the major challenges, I have three specific suggestions that the BIMSTEC should think about. These are not in the current thinking, but I think, if you want to think afresh, these are very important issues. So I think here, the first suggestion is that we need a crisis handling mechanism in this part of the world. The crisis may be financial, the crisis may be of the kind we saw during COVID, but the world, every country on its own is not the world that we want to live in. And I think here, India has a natural advantage of taking leadership and working towards a crisis, dealing mechanism, which makes sure that any of these partner countries, if they face any of these crises, can get the help that they need from the other members. So that's my first suggestion. The second is in terms of the global economy and the growth problem that I talked about, which is getting squeezed out because of the bipolar world. Here I think the natural solution is what is being called the China +1 solution. And I think this region, together with the ASEAN region, is ideally placed, in fact, to provide jointly alternative supply chain. We have talked about supply chain, other panelists have talked about supply chain, but that's the kind of solution that will solve part of this problem. And here I think again, Thailand has a critical role because it has partnership in both the BIMSTEC as well as ASEAN. And I think that is the way to move forward in terms of the growth challenge that we face right now. Third and final point that I want to make is that we have to understand that a multipolar world is far better for us than a bipolar world. I'll take two simple examples to make my point. We need countries like India and other South Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. We need more, we need both Russian oil and Ukrainian wheat. So you have to choose between Russian oil and Ukrainian wheat, we face a problem. Similarly, when we think about the trade-off between America imposing sanctions and China imposing its aggressive border policies, we have a problem with both. So it's not in our interest to join either of these worlds. And that is where we think, I think that we need to move to push towards a multipolar world. And here, again, I think India has taken some leadership by, going in for Russian oil purchase, etc., which is, I understand, useful to other countries as well, because, the oil is a critical part of every economy. But it would be far more effective politically in the world if these things are done as a group. And so a move towards multipolarity has to come from a regional grouping rather than individual countries. And so I think to finish off, the issue that politics is important is absolutely crucial. Politics will work only if it is in the interest of all countries to gain from it, politically speaking. And each of these countries have something to offer, not only in terms of economics, but politics as well. And I think that's the way to move forward in terms of BIMSTEC. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabyasachi. I think the cooperation, especially in the context of this polycrisis and how can the alternative supply chain be created, and also how to handle this multipolar world, especially some of the issues you very rightly mentioned towards the end. We need probably Russian oil at the same time Ukrainian wheat. How do you do that? And you emphasize that it's not only a single country can handle it. If it's a group, joint effort, then cooperation, regional cooperation can handle it in a better way. Let me invite our last panelist, Dr. Nihal Pitigala, who is joined online. Nihal, over to you, please.
Thank you, Salim. I am actually, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present, contribute an alternative version of how I think the regionalism can play a role as you move forward. I try to address this from a slightly different tack in the sense of touching upon two key aspects of what is happening, what has happened recently, and what has happened over the last 20 years, and what does it really mean for regionalism and regionalism, especially in the Bangkok region. So first thing is, I would like to take you through a little bit of stylized facts that will get us into the logic I think would make sense to the last point I'm making, which is how regionalism and geography becoming much more important. So the first of all, I completely agree with most of the panelists, how they have laid out. It's very complimentary remarks that was made, especially to Dr. Carl's last statement. I think I will submit based on what I'm about to speak would sort of it reinforces the points he makes. Okay, let's start. What really has happened recently, as you know, that there's a lot of talk going on around the global trade has seen its peak and it's plateauing. That is also to a certain extent true, but I think it's one's perspective. If you look into the details, how trade has transformed over time. We know that manufacturing share of trade and FDI has plateaued or in decline. That we have to keep in mind. That is actually, to a great extent, partly the domination of China in manufacturing, and they're becoming
Dr.
more
Nihal, your slides are not really moving. Are you?
Okay, no, I'm not presenting the slides. I'm just talking through the key points because I can't do justice with the entire set of slides. So let me take the audience through a few of the key points. But I will show one or two key ones I think that will make the statement clear. So the manufacturing is basically trade and FDI is plateauing, and manufacturing-led export growth, I think, is diminishing to some extent, and some people would claim it's almost dying. But I think that's also may not entirely be true. One of the reasons is that although intermediate imports, it's still rising. It's rising, except for China, for all the other countries, and part of the reason is India and East Asia are still very much integrated into some parts of it. So that's showing up. The global manufacturing trade, if you look at it, is actually has been. Let me see. Let me go to the second slide. I beg your pardon. Well, I can't move the.
Shared on the screen, Dr. Nihal.
Yes, let me. Okay, there you are. Do you see the slides?
Yeah, we can see. Who is sharing the slide? Did you? So we have shared the slide. Can you tell us which slide to move on? The second one, second slide.
Here's the second one. Okay. So this sums up the story. Sorry, I'm taking seconds away from it. Let me try to be abrupt. The G7 manufacturing has fallen over time. As you can see, the 6 emerging countries, what is interesting about this is the 6 emerging countries, which includes India, China, Korea, Indonesia, and Thailand, Brazil, are increasing. Actually, that shortfall of manufacturing has been met by these 6 major countries. It has come to a head in 2020. I think it's an intersection point, and that trajectory will continue, which means that's extremely welcoming. The other aspect of what I think is important, let me go to the next slide. Before I speak to the next slide, I just want to take you through a couple of other things. So the services trade in the meantime has thrived. If you look at these 3 charts, manufacturing trade, as you can see, is plateauing. FDI trends at the same time is sort of has a struggle over the last few years. I think there's quite a bit of FDI into the service sector now. In the service sector, ICT-enabled service is experiencing the kind of boom that the heyday of manufacturing has witnessed over the past, starting from 1990s. Well, that actually scenario is now somewhat changing because I think as you well, most of the speakers admitted that there is something out there which is US-China trade war is somewhat ratcheting up. So which means that the global economy has to adjust to this new geopolitical realities with the disruptions that's taking place in the familiar routes of trade as we knew it. One of the other things is as a response to that, but it's partly a symptom of this war, trade war. Let me not use these terms in bold terms. The global trade alert, for example, have highlighted how much industry policy has resurfaced in a big way. If you look at it, the tariff subsidies and targeted investment. I mean, if you look at some of them, to be very honest, that some of those doesn't even meet the first principle of externality. But given that, but that's a reality. That's sort of hovering around most of the global trade landscape. The change in trade picture shows that the overall trade is growing slowly, but there are fundamental shifts that are taking place that within those earmarks. So then I'll go to the most important slide, which I want to wrap up. This is, I think, quite hard hitting. What will transpire from this world, that this is done by the Boston Consulting Group, it has been very well reviewed, in fact quoted by the World Bank, that the shortfall, the outflow from the trade spat is basically the global trade net by 2022 will forecast something on the order of like 200 billion of like spillover coming out of the US-China trade war into the other countries. Now, one of the things I will emphasize is you can see that geography is playing a major part in this reconfiguration. If you look at it, Mexico is immediately benefiting tremendously from this. And there's, of course, diversion through other countries, the investment that is going to be diverted in order to supply some of the trade that has took place directly between US and China. But, some of this trade have come through multiple avenues, indirectly through, Southeast Asia and Japan and so on and so forth. But in this reconfiguration, ASEAN is going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries. Its trade is supposed to grow like in the order of 1.2 trillion over the next 10 years. But one of the interesting things about that is the India ignition, what I call the benefit of low-cost structure, the increased capable workforce, improving logistics. The China Plus strategy, obviously, India is going to benefit. I think I can't go into detail. One aspect of it that we can sort of explore in some stage in the future is how, because the service trade is supposed to grow, and it will grow much faster. Actually, the globalization is I would say not reducing as much as that protagonists would out to say, but it's reconfiguring. Manufacturing trade in the global is about 85%, services trade is 15%, but the services trade share is growing rapidly so that it will become the driver of future trade. So in that sense, India is in an extremely good position to take advantage. And it's still, I think, having said all of that, G7 countries will still play a role. They will still continue to be US and EU continue to be major consumers of services. But having said that, what have happened recently is, if you know that with the global trade choke points like Red Sea has come into the surface the importance of nearshoring and multishoring. So what I want to take away from this is that geography increasingly, this is borne by a number of excellent articles written by MIT and the others, are generating regionalism is the way to generate future value chains. It's a way to generate, short-term value chains in a way that regionalized value chains that has efficient links to the an external. Could it be EU? Could it be US? But uh, the other point I want to mention is that uh, technology, the way it's changing, it will impact future trade, especially AI, and especially in the services trade dimension. There's a tendency for labor to be substituted to some extent, although services will grow, and that's an aspect that we have to keep in mind. The last point I want to mention about the geography and regionalism, why BIMSTEC is so important, is something that you mentioned at the beginning, Professor Salim, is the climate. Now, the Bay of Bengal region is highly susceptible to climate change and rising sea levels. And there's this public good that straddles across the entire Bay of Bengal, which extends from Sri Lanka to Bangladesh to Northeast India and to some parts of East Asia, which you cannot get nexus of trade climate together without a cohesion that extends in the Bay of Bengal region. And that's a sort of a rallying cry that one needs to sort of pay attention to. With those remarks, let me end it there. Sorry about this, Salim. Sorry about this little, uh, backsliding I had with the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nihal. I think uh, you highlighted the importance of the services trade, and which is definitely, no doubt, is extremely important. And these are the kind of new areas where the BIMSTEC countries, they really need to get into. We also know that it's not only the services, but also there is a kind of services manufacturing links or servicification of the manufacturing or the manufacturing content in the services sector. So all these discussions need to be there, or more research is needed. But on the BIMSTEC
Mm.
Why am I focusing on the SDGs? Because this is also a region which has huge challenges in terms of poverty alleviation, economic transformation. We have countries graduating from LDC status. So it's important to put it in that larger context of the SDGs and how a sub-regional sort of framework such as BIMSTEC can actually help advance in that broader context. Now, this slow progress is exacerbated by an increasingly complex international order. That's also been mentioned, and I want to get to a bit more of the specifics of that complexity. This is evolving and adapting to new challenges and opportunities resulting from the interplay of a variety of forces. It's geopolitical, economic, social, cultural, environmental, technological. So I don't think we've ever faced such a multiplicity of factors playing such an important role. We've also talked about the power dynamics among states and other actors. And here it's important to go beyond the governments. I think we need to talk much more about the role of other kinds of organizations, not just international organizations, non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations, when we are talking about the reconfiguration of supply chains, and civil society, thanks to technology again. They're all evolving rapidly. Advances in technology and communication are making it easier than ever before for people and businesses to connect and collaborate across borders. And this is enabling the emergence of new economic powerhouses in Asia and other parts of the world. It's creating opportunities for innovation and space for new voices and perspectives. I think innovation is something that we also need to look at because, again, many of the countries in BIMSTEC are among the leaders in many areas of innovation. At the same time, technological advancements are also throwing up new challenges which strike at the heart of sovereign, societal, and individual rights and values. Alongside these trends is the rise of populism and nationalism in many parts of the world, pushing back against globalization and the perceived loss of national identity and sovereignty that it entails. This has led to a rise in protectionist policies, trade disputes, and frictions between nations, further destabilizing the global order and making it more difficult to predict and manage. I think we need to kind of face it up front that the rise of this new industrial policy, fiscal activism, these kinds of things pose a major challenge to many countries in this region. Added to these, of course, the polycrisis, the series of shocks that the world has had to confront and is still confronting today. The recent COVID-19 pandemic upended lives, pushing millions into poverty, disrupting trade and investment flows, and has had severe adverse social and economic consequences which have derailed years of progress on the SDGs. Concurrently, geopolitical tensions exemplified by ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Middle East have disrupted global supply chains, stoked inflation, and created widespread uncertainty. The impact of these crises in our region is profound, reshaping supply chains and international trade flows. The conflict in Ukraine poses risks of renewed disruptions in the supply of key commodities, as has been mentioned, wheat, fertilizer, fuel. Meanwhile, the conflict in the Middle East raises concerns about potential unilateral reductions in oil and gas supplies from the producers there, reminiscent of the oil embargo 50 years ago that led to steep price increases and a major economic shock. Furthermore, geopolitical decoupling trends are reconfiguring global production networks. The incipient reshoring of manufacturing from China to other countries in our region, to those deemed more friendly by G7 countries, could significantly affect Asia-Pacific economies. Now, I'll just give an estimate. According to McKinsey Global Institute, 15 to 25% of global goods trade could shift to different countries over the next 5 years. This China plus one, reshoring strategy, coupled by rising protectionism and fiscal activism in climate-related products and semiconductors in the US and Europe, poses challenges to some of our region's competitive manufacturers while creating opportunities for some others. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US, new industrial policies for energy transition in Europe, CBAM, the EU's Deforestation Initiative, the US Chips and Science Act, all illustrate this activist trend with uncertain implications for trade and investment flows and with differential effects across countries. Even within BIMSTEC, different countries will have different impact of all of this kind of trends that are happening. Against this fluid and more decentralized backdrop, the need as well as potential for cooperation and collaboration between nations and other actors. And I keep mentioning here other actors. I think the role of the private sector has to be increased significantly, because the kind of challenges we are facing, governments will not be able to address, nor the financing solutions that people are talking about. This is reflected in the emergence of new geopolitical alliances, coalitions, and cooperation frameworks. We could call this vertical globalization, where the world is increasingly splitting into multiple groups, both formal and informal, which are likely to reshape everything from supply chains to sustainability. In the Indo-Pacific, the US has proposed Chip4 Semiconductor Alliance. In the Middle East, the I2U2 bloc has been created to advance innovation. In the Pacific, we have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is forcing many countries to strategically balance their trade and investment relations between the major powers. With these emergent blocs, the world is rapidly moving away from a one-group-for-all approach. The new alliances and corridors that are forming risk creating more global fragmentation, forcing businesses and governments to realign their strategies, but are also creating opportunities to position themselves in regional and global value chains. In this challenging context, this is where we have to put BIMSTEC. The importance of sub-regional and inter-sub-regional cooperation and integration can't be overstated. Sub-regional initiatives in Asia and the Pacific, such as CAREC, GMS, SASEC, SARC, BIMSTEC, SARC, of course, we have to take with a grain of salt, play a crucial role in fostering greater economic cooperation and integration among member countries. These initiatives aim to improve transport and trade connectivity, access to markets, develop shared resource economic corridors, strengthen linkages to global value chains, tourism, people-to-people connectivity, etc. The progress made by these initiatives is, of course, different across the different groupings, but it's evident from some of the integration indices, which show several of them have gained traction from 2006 to 2020. Southeast Asia, of course, those initiatives have exhibited the highest levels of integration and consistent improvement over time. Despite the challenges posed by COVID-19, regional integration trends have remained largely unaffected, highlighting the resilience and the need for these kinds of sub-regional frameworks. Sub-regional cooperation has proven to be a key factor in mitigating impacts of the pandemic, in addressing geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions, inflation, and other challenges. Economies continue to make significant efforts at the regional and sub-regional level. By deepening economic linkages, improving connectivity, accelerating growth, reducing poverty, sub-regional cooperation and such initiatives are instrumental. The tangible progress made by some of these initiatives, again, I would not say that BIMSTEC is one that has shown great tangible results. SARC definitely has not. But this can be attributed where it's been possible to strong commitment of member countries at the highest level and the support provided by organizations. So for instance, in some cases you have organizations such as the Asian Development Bank, or you have very strong institutionalized mechanisms, as was mentioned. Unless you have those, it's going to be very difficult. You need governance, you need financing, and you need political will. Without these three, you're not going to get progress. Within this framework, BIMSTEC emerges as an important player in fostering cooperation, particularly in the Bay of Bengal region. Spanning the arc between South and Southeast Asia, it's uniquely positioned to play a significant role in sub-regional integration. If we look at its combined GDP of $3.7 trillion, accounting for 4% of global GDP, 3.8% of global trade. This economic heft, coupled with its strategic location along key maritime trade routes, positions it as a crucial facilitator of regional and sub-regional cooperation. However, its potential remains largely untapped. Currently, intra-BIMSTEC trade accounts for only 5.6% of total trade of member states, significantly lower than other regional groupings like ASEAN, where intra-regional trade is at 25%. This disparity underscores the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead for BIMSTEC. To fully harness this potential and strengthen BIMSTEC's role in sub-regional cooperation, we need to focus on enhancing trade and investment integration, and many of the ideas that have been proposed are very much required. Firstly, enhancing trade and investment integration. For that, UNCTAD's 2023 Regional Integration Report suggests that comprehensive regional trade agreements can boost intra-regional trade and Dr. Rahman mentioned, that we need to go beyond goods. We have to bring in new areas. The really emerging one is services. We have to bring in investment. And also what's important is not to go with a siloed approach to any of these, because these are all interconnected issues. So like what has been mentioned about servicification, the negotiators also have to look at these issues as being linked. Unfortunately, in the current modalities, and this is a point I want to highlight, this is relevant for countries when they negotiate FTAs, but also in these sub-regional groupings. When you bring in new areas, then please look at the coherence across the areas. They should not proceed in negotiating strategies which just move parallelly, but don't see how they link with each other. Secondly, we have to deepen cooperation in critical sectors essential for the region's resilience and sustainable development. Energy has been mentioned, agriculture, disaster management. These can yield benefits 2 to 3 times greater than unilateral actions. And lastly, digital. This has also been mentioned. I think in all countries of the world today, in some form or the other, the digital agenda is going very strong. And in this context also, I mean, if you look at BIMSTEC, you have some key leaders in services trade. Digital services is picking up. And I think for the LDC graduating countries, services trade, digital connectivity, digitalization of their economies, this is very important for structural transformation. So again, looking at those needs of the nations and putting this into the BIMSTEC context is important. So embracing digital transformation is key to future prosperity. It's estimated that digital trade facilitation, and I'll come to the issue of trade facilitation because the digital agenda plays a very important role there as well, that can reduce trade costs by up to 13% in the region. And here, of course, speaking from ESCAP, I would like to just mention, we have the Framework Agreement on Facilitation of Cross-Border Paperless Trade in Asia and the Pacific. Bangladesh is a member. None of the other countries from BIMSTEC are members. That offers a valuable platform for harmonizing digital regulations and building capacity in digital trade facilitation. According to ESCAP studies, the implementation of cross-border paperless trade measures could reduce trade costs by up to 25% in the region. For BIMSTEC countries, this could translate into billions of dollars in savings and significantly boost competitiveness in the global market. By exploring and potentially adopting similar digital trade facilitation measures within BIMSTEC, we could unlock economic benefits for all member states. This could include faster trade times, reduced costs, increased trade volumes, and overall improved competitiveness. So with those words, as we prepare for the next summit, let's consider how we can incorporate some of these principles and these strategies into regional cooperation. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure we'll have very useful discussions.
Thank you, Dr. Rupachanda, for excellent deliberation. I think now we have you have heard from the panelists and the special remarks by Dr. Rupachanda. So they covered very diverse areas and they're very comprehensive too. When the panelists discussed about some of the very challenges related to the new world order, Professor Mustafizur Rahman emphasized quite a lot on the FTA and expanding the scope of FTA and some of the related challenges to that. Dr. Ganeshan Wignaraja, in addition to the FTA, he talked about how to expand or make the BIMSTEC master plan operationalized and more context specific, in the context of the current changing world war situation. And also he talked about the financing issues and how to strengthen the secretariat. Dr. Sabyasachi Kaur took a bit of different approach, told us about how the global order is changing and the new challenges which are emerging and how the new areas of new cooperation can be set out in the context of this new changes in the global order. Dr. Nihal Pitigala, he emphasized quite a lot on the services trade and some of the very important issues related to the services trade and related to the, how BIMSTEC can take it forward. And finally, Dr. Rupachanda gave us a very comprehensive presentation on the various issues related to the BIMSTEC cooperation and need for cooperation, and put it in the very broader context, like the Asia-Pacific cooperation, where BIMSTEC is one important area, a group of countries, and which the successful cooperation of BIMSTEC can lead to a broader cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. So with this now, the floor is open. We have, I think, 30 minutes. So we'll start, and I request, we don't have those things to, but you can raise your hand. Yes, I will give the first floor to Dr. Ambassador Sumit Nakandala. So around 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, so that we can cover as many as the participants. So we have the microphones, please. Yes, here, please.
Thank you, Salim. I think we heard extremely articulated 3 presentations. I think UNSCAP must be there for every BIMSTEC meeting because, in fact, some of the basic architecture of BIMSTEC was done inside the UNSCAP Secretariat. I just want to make a couple of points. The first one, Mustafizur very rightly said about the political will. This has been the bane of the success of regional integration process everywhere, in particular in the Bay of Bengal and South Asia as well, SAARC we have talked about. So how do we do this? The political will. The political will for what? Is it just a political will or political will for regional integration process? I used to call regional integration as a social justice project. So that is number one thing which we need to think. The second point which Mustafizur said, in fact, when we started the FTA negotiations 2004, after the conclusion of the framework agreement, to my understanding, in fact, unlike South Asia, we started trade in goods, trade in services, custom cooperation, investment chapter, all four together. All four together. I don't know, I mean, I stand corrected on that. That's the second one. The third one, Ganeshan talks about the connectivity master plan, which of course Rupa also mentioned. In fact, the precursor to BIMSTEC connectivity master plan was the BTILS study. I still remember in 2014, we had the final meeting in Delhi. The Asian Development Bank wanted to take the ownership of the BTILS project and implement the identified projects. Unfortunately, one member state objected to that. In fact, ADB was very, very disappointed. Okay, so that we need to keep in mind. Even now, I think the ADB is ready to help in the projects. Next one, which I wanted to complement what Rupa said about the rise of nationalism. I'll elaborate during my intervention later. But we have not talked about the rise of economic nationalism. How do we deal with that? Now, we see certain early signs of economic nationalism coming, not only in this part of the world, but I think things will be changing towards the end of the year with those elections we have seen already. Things will be difficult. So, how do we do this? Ganeshan also talked about, some speakers talked about the secretariat. We need to understand that BIMSTEC is a member-driven organization. It is members' wish. What is necessary, there should be a difference between how the UNSCAP is functioning. It is a secretariat-driven organization. BIMSTEC is a member-driven organization. I think there was a mention about ASEAN. Now, the combination here would be for a successful regional cooperation and integration, there should be some amount of secretariat-driven and the member-driven component. Now, to do all these things, I come to the most important point, Mustafizur raised, which we have been talking about.
I want you to sit down.
Political will for what? I think that Apex will have to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Nakarandala. I think there's a $1 billion question, how to generate political will. And I'm glad that our esteemed panelists will be able to answer this question. We will come back to the panelists for the answer, of course. So next, please, hands. Yes, over there, microphone, please. I request the participants to just very briefly introduce themselves and then in 2 to 3 minutes deliver, please.
Thank you, Professor. I am Hiramani Gemire, Center for Innovation in Government in Nepal. I would like to pick up on Professor Rahman's reference to the Eminent Persons Group, EPG. The EPG is working hard, and I think they are working on the idea of what they are calling prosperous, resilience, and open BIMSTEC, the so-called pro-BIMSTEC agenda, as part of their Bangkok vision, which is very good. I want to pick up on the third component of the pro-BIMSTEC agenda, openness. Based on our experience in the region, BIMSTEC member countries cannot be said as open in terms of working with other stakeholders, especially the partnership with civil society. It remains restricted in this region, and there are reports that the space for civil society is shrinking. And in terms of collaboration, partnership with the private sector, the relationships are more characterized by hierarchy than by partnership, the true spirit of partnership. So in that case, it's very important for BIMSTEC members to think about the idea of openness and how they could be more open in terms of policy partnership with civil society and the private sector. And I think this is one of the crux of the problems that BIMSTEC members should resolve. And if we could have some ideas on this, how openness could be promoted in BIMSTEC deliberations and BIMSTEC policy work, etc. I think that should be a help for BIMSTEC, taking BIMSTEC forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Gemire. Yes, okay, the microphone is near to Dr. Provid there, then first, and then I'll come to Dr. Dayaratne.
I congratulate all the speakers and also intervention from the floor, Ambassador Sumit, for their excellent deliberations. So I'd like to know, what Sabyasachi Kar you was talking about. We have an external affairs minister in India who is a super champion professor, Dr. Jayasankar. So in his book, he identified the phases of globalization from and the diplomat's perspective, which may not match with an economist view. So he said that post-Cold War, we started with bipolar world, Russia and America, then all the way to multipolar world, then multipolar Asia. 5 phases he divided. So, and we know, when we went into a bipolar world post-World War II, we see worldwide rise of economic nationalism, anti-laissez-faire movements. In India, it was, all banks were nationalized, coal nationalized, etc., 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 the whole story. Now, if we go for, I'd like to know Professor Kar's perspective on this. When he talked about, are we looking for a change of the world order? Is bipolar is good for us? So, would you like to tell us something more? Because bipolar means it's more rise of economic nationalism, decoupling. It's reciprocal tit for tat on the trade. You name it. Like Professor Rupachandra was talking about some of those, and like CBAM, for example, cross-border greenhouse gas emission adjustment by the European Unions. So where are we leading? Are there 7 countries, the BIMSTEC? Will they give us some solution? Can we do something together, raising to these challenges? So this is my interventions, and looking forward to response from Sabyasachi. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Dayaratne, it's microphone over here, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. First of all, I also congratulate all the speakers putting into the discussion on challenges. I think most of the speakers, what I gathered was, spoke great deal of amount how to move forward the trade. Our country experienced multilateral experience. In that respect, what I want to emphasize two things if we look at the global scenario. Earlier, global trade was dominated by North-North trade. Now this has now shifted from North-North trade to the South-South trade. South-South trade is expanding faster than North-North trade. One important missing point in certain analysis is South-South trade is also concentrating handful of countries. This is very pertinently you can observe within the SAARC, within the BIMSTEC trade. Reasons, why reasons? I think some of the reasons Professor Musafi mentioned. Reason, now South-South trade, for example, I will very openly now, if you look at the trade, India's trade, India trade, more trade with outside the BIMSTEC core, outside the SAARC. Sri Lanka also the same. Why this is not happening? Our number of regulatory, our own restriction. Those national restrictions have not allowed us to integrate more and more. My second point, we talk much about the free trade agreement. BIMSTEC nations are a very good combination. We have LDCs, we have South Asian two nations and the South. We can learn from what happened within the SAARC and Southeast countries like Thailand and Myanmar can share their experience what happened. I think the free trade agreements, when you talk about, first try to be more trade oriented rather than inward looking oriented. Why I say is, free trade agreement meant to reduce the barriers, existing barriers. We are not doing that. Neither BIMSTEC nor the SAARC. But South Asian countries have done it much more fast. Then the 2 points what Professor Rahman mentioned. Another barrier is our own regulatory mechanism and the capacity restriction on which the big countries can support each other. For example, I heard this word before, this mutual recognition agreement. Now, earlier I have referred to this study. Some of the studies done by the ADB have clearly pointed out that market potential, ability to trade have been restricted because of our inability to meet the technical standard than the SPS standard. The reason is not unjustifying those regulatory measures, but inability to meet those regulatory barriers. Therefore, the capacity of those countries should be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ratne. Okay, we'll take the last question from the back, and then I'll come back to the panelists.
Thank you, sir, for the floor. Let me be very specific and quick as the time is running out. My question to Dr. Rupa, and I'm so enchanted that she has brought the issue of SDG in the purview of BIMSTEC discussion. But I would be very delighted if you can please elaborate more on the expected role of BIMSTEC in facilitating the SDG. A specific idea would be appreciated because considering the capacity and the expand of BIMSTEC. And I think that specific information or recommendation can be well considered in the BIMSTEC meeting as well, because the issue has been more complex and demanding, particularly in the post-pandemic situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I'll come with this is the last question then. See here, please, the microphone.
Thank you for inviting me to join this very important dialogue for BIMSTEC. As a former Director General of the International Economic Department, Foreign Office, and former Ambassador to India, who has been involved with BIMSTEC from its inception in 1997, including drafting the Bangkok Declaration. So I am very happy that BIMSTEC is still alive, even though it's not so well. And so we have to speak about the past, present, and future of BIMSTEC. So I just have a few very important remarks to make about BIMSTEC. As you know, when the 5 countries, India, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, start speaking about regional cooperation. At the time, you may be well aware that the Mekong countries, China, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, have been cooperated in the development. I would highlight the word development. All you speak about trade, investment, tourism, whatever sector that we've been cooperated, it comes to the final objective is development. So before BIMSTEC, we have the Mekong Regional Cooperation. Of course, India at the time still have the plan for the Look East initiative. But China, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, who share Mekong country, have been cooperating. Of course, we are all, I use this term, for me, India is mother of civilization for Asia. So, we have also cooperation framework under the Mekong, India, Mekong, Ganga. This is how I see the so-called geopolitical and economic framework for this region. As you see, India and China is the most important Asia superpower, which in fact, I like to share with you that BIMSTEC, when it was initiated, certainly we have India as a major focal point. But after how many years has been 27 years. So what we have been doing during the past 27 years, from the ministerial meeting up to summit, of course, we've been sharing with those master plan projects in 5 sectors, which I think every time that we meet, we just try to think about what we have done and what we are going to do. Even today, still questions come up. What is the political will? How we are going to move forward? In spite of the fact that, already 27 years that we have been trying to undertake this project. So I just like to three major important. I think, of course, we have to see all this cooperation in the holistic manner because it's all integrated. Trade, investment, tourism, connectivity, transportation. I would like to highlight the word connectivities because, when we have the BIMSTEC ministerial meeting before I been assigned to be ambassador to India, at that time, I proposed that BIMSTEC should involve ADB to provide us with the support like ADB has been doing for GMS country. The road network from Thailand, Myanmar, India, and Bangladesh, of course, must be and should be in Mekong region, all the road network has already been finished, but the road from Thailand to Myanmar to Gogarek and India still under construction. This is all because of the not only economic but political will. India has been providing assistance to
sir,
build the road in Myanmar. So I just like to summarize about the connectivity, the road transport, and also maritime transport. Bay of Bengal, you have the seaport all the way from south of Thailand to Myanmar to Chittagong to Mumbai and so on. So we have been speaking about cooperation in promoting maritime transport. I think that this is one of the most important elements that help promote not only promote of goods and tourism, but of course, we have to highlight the importance of implementation. See, what have been lacking is we have all those project and program and master plan, but without implementation, there is just like nothing. So this is how I like to see the future of BIMSTEC, that we should highlight those we have been cooperating. But speaking about FTA, of course, India, for me, is a champion of the South country who fight in the World Trade Organization. And I extremely admire India to be the one who chair of course, the trade agreement this day, of course, involved with the right, the patent and, all those things. So
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I'll come back to the panelists now. I'll start with the panelists who are joined online. So I go first to Nihal. In 1 to 2 minutes, Nihal, any response to the questions? Is it there? Dr. Nihal Pitigala? Okay. Dr. Ganeshan Vignaraja, please.
Am I audible?
Oh, yes, Nihal, you're back. Please, yes.
That's okay, Ganeshan. Why don't you go ahead? I think you are raring to go before me.
No, it's my internet is not stable, so I just want to make sure. Thank you very much. This was very wonderful comments. A couple of points I just want to mention. I hope at the next summit, beyond the one that we are seeing this year, we are not having another regional forum that's saying BIMSTEC should have been even better than what it is today, right? So to avoid the fate of SARC, which is political, but also not achieved much, I think we need to be very ambitious. So on the master plan, and my point to Mr. Nanakandala is really that the ambition needs to be there with big numbers. And I think this forum should say that big numbers are needed to build the infrastructure that is needed for BIMSTEC to move forward. And I think a number like $200 billion in my mind, is a realistic number. And that may galvanize countries. And that requires, a partnership amongst the MDBs, the World Bank, the AIIB, the ADB, and even others. The EIB may have to come into play. And this resonates very well with the debate today globally on development banks restructuring their finance for development. So I think that's got to be there, that comes out. If we carry on as business as usual, this won't come about, and we'll be disappointed with what happens, and the regional projects won't get done. On the Secretariat, the issue there is, can we really do much with what we have? I mean, it seems unfit for purpose. That's all I can say, having studied ASEAN very closely. And I think we really need to be ambitious, and one hopes the EPG will provide some proper guidance on this. On Daya's point, I think it was very important about South-South trade, and he's right, South-South trade is more important for BIMSTEC countries, and this really means a concerted effort to get in FDI, and I'm not sure how much FDI work is being done within BIMSTEC, and this deep FTA, but also much more this idea of predictable policy. Very last point from our Thai ambassador, ex-ambassador to India, I think this point about India being important is there, but I think Thailand has a very important role, ambassador, to play also as a balancer in some level in thing. And I think some of the small countries, now I wonder, and there's a question which I don't have an answer, is whether BIMSTEC can be in some way led a little bit by the small countries so that some sort of consensus can be achieved. And that's to some extent the ASEAN way I see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ganeshan. Dr. Nihal Pitigala?
Yeah. So in response to Dr. Dayaratna's question, there's the simple fact that is hovering over the SAARC region and by extension the Bay of Bengal has been the implicit barriers between the countries, the closest two countries even sharing borders. The restrictiveness, the implicit restrictiveness, this index that is done, our colleagues at the World Bank shows that some of the countries, even those sharing borders, have barriers more than 5 times relative to their barriers with the far from the countries in the distance. But having said that, 2 other points. Gravity is a very strong indicator, and it's very hard when your countries have different regulatory and tariff regime. It's very hard to stop the flow. Gravity is a strong inducement. The informal trade between countries, I would say that we have this general narrative, we say that SAARC region is 5% global. That's not entirely accurate. The informal trade, if you will, those in some form, the last that general extensive survey that is done, that is a missing piece of this puzzle, could exceed in the order of 10% to 12%, even more. That will put us a question, why would this trade, and who are these traders, and how would they trade? What are the incentive structure? If there's a way to address that at the ground level, I think there is an incremental way that things can be addressed. The final thought being that precisely go to say when the barriers are high, when you share borders, that naturally it goes into the gray area or the black area. And you can enable that to happen. So handling incrementally those barriers would sometimes get you somewhere that even if you don't speak in forums like ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nihal. Dr. Sabyasachi Kaur.
Thank you. So I'll first answer Professor Dey's question. It was directed towards me. So the issue is, what does it really mean for developing countries to have a unipolar or a bipolar or a multipolar world? And my answer is that ultimately it is the power structures that decide the institutions which allow or doesn't allow countries in the global south to take advantage of things like trade, financial liberalization, etc. Now, the architecture of global governance that was put into place either during the unipolar period, which is post, the 90s and the first decade of this, century, or the one before that, which was bipolar that you mentioned, had a lot of problems or restrictions for developing countries and their aspirations. And we see this reflected in the constant, complaints that these countries have about organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, and WTO. So the importance of multipolar world is to be able to push forward your own interests and to make sure that the governance structures of the world are to your advantage rather than to the advantage of existing power structures. So what I would, the way I would think of is that a multipolar world is not only an advantage in terms of the choice problems going away, which I mentioned, the choice problem between oil from Russia and wheat from Ukraine, but also allowing or enabling, developing countries to push for their own interest in these, governance structures. So that's the importance of the multipolar world. And I'll briefly just, talk about the issue of political will, because this has been mentioned by a number of people. And I have 2 points here. One is that as political economists, we always understand that, politicians or policymakers are very fast to change when there is an interest involved. And the reason that political will isn't there is because there is no clear interest that these policymakers see from it. And it is the work of academics and people who develop ideas to show them where the interests lie. And so I think the suggestions that I made were in that nature, trying to show who can actually gain from what by giving different interest groups different kinds of things to gain from. So India is looking for support in its multipolar in this multipolar world. It gains that support politically. Other countries or economies, I remember my co-panelist Dr. Vignaraja in talking about it about 2 years back in a similar panel had said, what do small countries like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh gain from this kind of a thing? And he was suggesting that somebody has to take the initiative, probably India, to put in place something that gives them that stability. This was during the period of instability. And so that is the kind of tangible gain that needs to be there in order for political will to follow. The other issue I would like to point out is that we are perhaps overemphasizing political will to an extent by underemphasizing the role of the private sector. And this is something that Dr. Chanda had spoken about earlier and even today. The politician is quick to change his mind when the private sector is massively interested in a certain change. And so the way to change all of this is to go through that route. How do we incentivize the private sector in these countries to interact with each other and solve some of these problems? And the politicians will just follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Shambhushaji. Professor Mustafizur Rahman.
Thank you, Chair. I think all the questions were very insightful. Some of those were comments and observations, but those were also very well taken. Now, Sumit, Ambassador Sumit, I think rightly asked the question when we spoke about triggering and sparking political will. Political will for what? But he has himself answered. He said that BIMSTEC is a social justice project. I think it is also an economic justice project. And if the politicians realize this, I think they can fast forward the BIMSTEC-wide cooperation. In democratic political dispensation, politics is concentrated expression of economic interests, I think. And if that be so, then obviously the costs of non-cooperation also comes up. And if they realize that, I think then I think the justification for the political will be there. In the context of South Asia, in the book A Glass Half Full, it was estimated that exporting from Dhaka to Kathmandu is 1.5 times more costly than exporting from Dhaka to Sao Paulo. So that's the cost of non-cooperation, I think. And there, Dr. Hiramani rightly mentioned, it's just the third pillar, openness, and non-state actors, private sector. For example, today I'm very happy to see Ms. Selima Ahmed, who was also member of parliament and also one of the leading lights in Bangladesh entrepreneurship. So this is the type of stakeholders that we need. And I think that during the summit there will also be business conclave, in parallel. So I think this is very important that non-state actors and state actors, they come together, and then the political, will, which we are talking about, will be triggered. With respect to Dr. Ratna, I think a very valid point. If we don't have the supply side capacities, then how do we trade? And the supply side capacities will be created if we can have triangulation of investment connectivity, transport connectivity, and trade connectivities. And there, for example, in Bangladesh, only 12% of our export is to South Asia, Southeast Asia, and ASEAN. Why? Because most of these countries, they don't import those products which we are exporting. 85% of our export is ready-made garments, apparels. So you don't export apparels to India and also to China, although they have given us, zero tariff access. India for all products and China for 99% of the products. But China imports $2,600 billion, but our export, in spite of the market access preferences, is less than $1 billion. India has been giving us zero tariff access since 2011. India imports about $700 billion. Our export to India is only $2 billion in spite of the market preferences. Why? Because the supply side is not there. And that's where, BIMSTEC-wide cooperation and integration and, attracting investment, targeting the BIMSTEC market, taking advantage of the market access preferences, that triangulation comes in. So I think that political will be triggered if we can show as analysts and produce the evidence that this makes economic sense. Then it will make also political sense. And that's why this type of discussion that we are having today is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. Finally, Dr. Upachanda.
Thank you. Very, very useful questions and comments. So I just wanted to pick up on this because this was actually the main point I wanted to make. Both of my panelists have said this. One is the role of the private sector. I said it and I would emphasize it again, that in terms of modalities, I think it's important to engage the private sector, not just as a parallel business conclave, but as part of the deliberations. So that, because the way technology is changing, the kind of environmental issues that are coming up, the financing needs, all of these are largely going to be met by the private sector. Infrastructure investments, the connectivity agenda is not going to come from government budgets. Yes, it will come from World Banks and ADBs, etc. But the public-private partnerships, these kinds of modalities. And for that, you need the private sector sitting at the table and discussing. So that modality has to be thought through. And that would also address the question that you said of openness and partnership. That is, how do you actually engage the stakeholders? Not as a side conversation, but as an integral part of the conversation. Now, I'll come to the question of, the SDGs. So the way I look at it, of course, you need a much more granular approach to this, but I'll go back to the first point that was made by Dr. Rahman, which is the global commons. You can look at things as regional commons or sub-regional commons, right? In my mind, food security, climate security, health security, and general peace and security. These are really the commons for today. These are global public goods. They have strong regional and sub-regional dimensions. Many issues are transboundary issues, and that's where sub-regional cooperation frameworks become important. So I would start with health, for instance, which COVID has very well highlighted. Look at these commons, look at within the grouping, what sort of mutually beneficial arrangements could be worked out. Now, within this grouping, you have pharma producers, you have R&D, you have very strong public health countries like Thailand. There are learnings here. There is possible exchange of knowledge, technology, R&D, investments. You have to start thinking granularly. So target some SDGs which are very relevant for the region and see who has what role to play in that. There's cross-border telemedicine. It's possible to do trade in services. You have digital connectivity. So embed the other agenda around some of these common goals which lead to certain SDGs. Okay? So health is one because affordable and equitable access to vaccines and medicines, drugs is extremely important in this region. SAARC has a chapter on health, cooperation chapter on health. What prevents doing something similar and working through the investment, trade, R&D, IP, all of those cooperation things. There are some interesting challenges also in the region with LDC graduation, TRIPS waiver, etc. So you have India, for instance, investing in Bangladesh in the pharmaceutical industry, but once that goes away, can you look at how you can kind of enable more cooperation even in a post-graduation era? So these are things I think for the policy makers, but you will need the industry there. You cannot do it without the industry. Similarly, I would say on agriculture, food security, because poverty, hunger, these are major issues in this region. So again, technology transfer, creating communities of practice. There are very practical modalities by which you can address specific SDGs. So maybe take 3-4 of them. Climate, transboundary issues. You have the disaster group already. Now, flooding, disaster management, pollution, transboundary pollution. So I would say that there are many ways. This is going beyond trade and investment. It is a broader agenda of cooperation when you come to SDGs. But what you will need again is financing for some of this. Who will pick up that? The other is you need capacity building in some of these areas. And what I would do actually is map out, one, the issue, the players, their respective roles, and partner organizations. Can ADB play a role in this? Can ITC play a role? So MSMEs is another area which is of common interest, extremely important. So now when you're talking of trade and investment, we can't just talk broadly of macro trade and investment. You have to talk of the firms and their integration into the value chains. Well, MSME capacity building. There are good practices in the region. Can we have some of that sharing? Can we actually invest in some of these training programs? So I think we have to start getting more detailed, but pick 3-4 quick winners with clear mutual gains on all sides and proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Rupachanda. I think you should also join me in thanking these panelists and the special guest in making this session an excellent one, because I think the very rich discussion and many issues which really came out. I'm quite sure that our team is working on to have a draft declaration of this event towards the end of this conference tomorrow, the very last session. We are extremely benefited from the very rich discussion today. I'm sorry that we had to spend a little bit extra time, but that also shows that the kind of richness in the discussion and responses from the audience, I think that was really great. So I thank you all, and I think there is an announcement for the next session, which is nothing but lunch.
Yeah, thank you very much to the chair and the panelists to give us the overview for the new order, the global challenge, and BIMSTEC. And we can continue to have a little conversation over the lunch, because next we're going to go have lunch, and the lunch is available outside, and we can have the seat on the room 702 and 703, and come back again at 1:30 for the next session. Enjoy your lunch.